ago. And so that is what I am grateful for.
Right, Mount Angel is an amazing place to go. I've been there a few times. I'd recommend it for anyone in the Portland area. Take a little retreat, personal retreat. They have an incredible library too. Others?
This is Rhonda. I am grateful for a couple hours off from work this morning, so I can just kind of regroup and get back into the swing of things.
Great. We're glad you're able to be here with us. Chelsea, how about you?
I also have a work thing. It's one of the busiest weeks of my ministry years, and I'm really grateful for the work that I get to do.
It's a great blessing if we can really love our work and find joy in it. Not everyone does.
Hi, it's Robin. I received a letter in the mail from George Fox this week saying that I was approved for graduation. So I'm grateful that I'm at that point.
Oh, wow. Well, congratulations. That is definitely good news.
I'm on the home stretch, so that's...
Yes, yeah. So this is your very last semester?
It is, yep.
You have this class and a few others?
I have one other, yeah.
One other, two more classes and you're done. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
You can move on to the Doctor of Ministry program then.
If I could find the money, I would do it.
Anyone else?
This is Jason. I guess I'm thankful for my wife, because she's just a great support for work and school and everything. So this week's been a great week with her.
Amazing. Yes. It's great to have support from your spouse, significant other.
I've had this may sound strange, but so yesterday I led a group of about 10 young adults we snowshoed out to a reservoir and then drilled some holes and fished, and I'm doing the same thing this afternoon. But the experience was a reminder of we go to the supermarket and we buy all of our food and stuff and we forget where it comes from, and it was just a reminder of of the connection we have with the creation and the world, and that I don't know, that was a good experience. I'm thankful for that.
So is that like ice fishing? Is that
yeah?
All that you drill a hole and
yep,
then light a fire so you can stay warm on the ice? Is that what you do?
Yeah. We didn't light a fire, but it was 32 degrees, so it wasn't that cold yesterday. But we had a foot of ice we had to drill through.
Oh, okay. Well, that sounds like quite an exciting experience. Yes. So I will share what I'm most grateful for. I got an opportunity to go down to the beach, Oregon coast, this past weekend, and it was like in the 50s. We thought that was cold. But it stopped raining on Saturday, and we had a wonderful nature walk. It was a church retreat, and just a chance to be on the beach. And it was just lovely. It's my favorite place to be in the world, so that was what I'm most grateful for. So, did everyone share? I think.
I'll share. This is Samantha. It's been not the best last few months for our family. We lost a really close friend of ours in a hiking accident.
Oh no.
But what I'm really most grateful for is just to see the hand of God in this family, who is probably our closest friends. It was their son. He was 21. So kind of a second child to me and a brother to my children. And it's just amazing to see how God is moving through this family and supporting them in ways that I just never would dream would be happening so quickly. So I'm grateful for his love and his grace and just the way he supports us in really difficult times.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful if you can see grace even in the midst of suffering and tragedy like that. So I'm so sorry to hear that. I can't think of much worse than to lose a child. Okay, another question I have for you is, what are you learning in any of your other classes that you can connect or relate or integrate into this class? Maybe you can't think of anything, but I'd be interested to know if there's anything that you might be learning or discussing in other classes that somehow connect with what you're learning and discussing in this class. Does anyone have an example of that? Trying to think holistically and see if there's a way that things kind of merge. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't.
I think I'm finding a connection and an interest in how religion and mysticism and views of God and our world are connected. And in History of Christianity in America, seeing the evolution, I guess, of the revolution and then the lack of intentionality versus the intentionality of the mystics has been very interesting.
That is interesting. Yes, thank you for sharing that, Rhonda. Anyone else think of a way that something in your other classes might connect with what you're learning here?
So I have a couple of thoughts.
Okay.
I'm finding actually that this ties in a lot with a previous history class that I took, just because that gave me setting for some of the people and kind of put them in their timeline, if you will.
Yeah.
This semester I'm doing Mission, Church, and Society, which partly talks about the ways religion interacts with culture. And I find what the mystics have to say interesting in that they're talking about essentials of faith that usually doesn't have anything to do with church structures, which is nice just because that separates out a bit from hierarchical structures that maybe don't transmit as well in other cultures. So just in terms of thinking when we're sharing the gospel, what it is we're trying to share, this offers a really different perspective, and that ties in nicely.
Yeah, there are ways I think that the mystics and what they teach can transcend cultures, even transcends other religions, because all religions have a mystical core. So mystics from even one religion can often communicate to mystics in another religion in ways that within institutions and structures that doesn't happen. Yeah. Good insight.
Hi, I'm taking a Old Testament Bible course, but it's with the emphasis on spiritual directors. And so thinking of it through the lens of, I guess, walking with people in spiritual direction. So there's a lot of crossover in the sense that we're often looking at the mystery of God and images of God and being open to new ways and kind of helping people navigate that transition, which I think the mystics kind of lead the way in that way. So the two kind of pair up pretty well, I think.
Yeah, those two definitely integrate. Easily integrate. Good. That's a great course to take alongside this course for your last two courses. Anyone else think of an example? Okay, well, let's move on. Now that you've had an introduction to the mystics, some of you are already very familiar. For others, it may be your first reading of the mystics. But now that you've had an introduction, you've read 4 mystics: Origen, Gregory of Nyssa, Augustine, and Julian. How would you define mysticism? What would be your definition of mysticism with the introduction that you've had so far? Anyone want to provide a definition, short definition?
I think I would say something like an intense pursuit of the presence of God in all circumstances.
An intense pursuit of the presence of God in all circumstances. That's a good definition. Yes, I like that. I think presence is definitely a key word, and pursuit. Anyone want to add to that? I guess they like your definition. Has she nailed it?
I would. I don't know how I would add it, but so like presence of God and the pursuit of God, but also the idea of waiting on God at the same time.
Okay, so listening, the idea of just being open to listening and waiting, moving into what the mystics call the apophatic. Are you familiar with that term?
Yeah.
It means without images. It's what contemplative prayer is. So that's kind of the listening piece. It's the type of prayer that most of the mystics would teach, that we need to move into this space where we're simply just open and listening and letting go of all our distractions and detaching from those to listen. Yeah, I think that is certainly a piece of mysticism. Anything else we should add to the definition?
It seems to really push boundaries. So like Julian asking for a bodily showing, or Augustine pushing past, mental boundaries to kind of get outside of the mind almost. So it's like it's a pursuit, and Rhonda really alluded to this. It's an intense pursuit, but it really pushes past some of the boundaries that we may know.
Yes, pushes past even the boundaries of our mind. That's good. It's, again, beyond the mind. Metanoia, beyond the mind. Yeah, I think we see that in all the, and you'll see that in every mystic that you read. And they're always satisfied, but never satisfied. The journey keeps going. Okay, anything else that we might add to that? Well, the definition that King gives us, let me find that here, I've got it here, is, this probably sounds familiar in the introduction of King's book. A mystic is a person who is deeply aware of the powerful presence of the divine spirit. Someone who seeks above all the knowledge and love of God. I think knowledge and love has to be in there somewhere. That's what they're seeking, particularly love. And for the mystics, love and knowledge are the same thing, right? It's not intellectual knowledge, but it's knowledge that comes through love. So they actually, love itself is knowledge in mystical thought. So they seek above all the knowledge and love of God. And a mystic is a person who experiences to an extraordinary degree the profoundly personal encounter with the energy of divine life. That's how she defines God, the energy of divine life. And I think that's a really good definition, except I wonder about the part where she says, who experiences to an extraordinary degree. Do you think that's necessary to be a mystic, to experience the presence to an extraordinary degree?
I don't think so, personally. Okay. And I think a great example would be Brother Lawrence. Brother Lawrence is probably my favorite mystic, but he's so mild compared to a lot of ones because he doesn't have like the great visions or anything, but
Right.
he feels close to God. And I don't know if there's even any evidence that he really experienced anything outside of the ordinary Christian praying, other than just the feeling of closeness because he constantly was pursuing.
Yeah, for him it wasn't an extraordinary, dramatic, rapturous kind of experience, but everything that he did was, for him, kind of an extraordinary encounter. I mean, I think there's a place there where he talks about flipping his little omelet for the love of God. I mean, you know, even just doing that to him was practicing the presence and a form of prayer. So I like her definition, but I agree. I don't know that it necessarily has to be to an extraordinary degree. So if we took out that part, to an extraordinary degree, would that definition describe you? Would you consider yourself a mystic? You could think about it. You don't have to say yes or no, but you might want to think about it.
Could you read the definition again?
Okay, a mystic is a person who is deeply aware of the powerful presence of the divine spirit. Someone who seeks above all the knowledge and love of God and who experiences, we'll take out the extraordinary piece, who experiences the profoundly personal encounter with God.
Can you be on the road to that?
I think we're all on the road to that. I think that's a really honest answer. And I think all of us, if we're in seminary, if we're pastors, if we're on a spiritual journey, that it would describe all of us. So I personally think we're all mystics. I think we're all born mystics, just like children are born artists. You know a child who's not an artist? Every child is a born artist, but then they grow up and they say they can't draw, right? I think it's the same with mysticism. I think children are just born, they're born mystics. They're born with a sense of connection with God. But as you grow into adulthood, you kind of lose that, and you're no longer on the mystical path, or wouldn't think of yourself in that way. That's kind of how I think of it. I think there is mystic with a capital M. Those mystics that we are studying often describe profound experiences, but not all of them even focus on experiences. Origen really didn't describe any kind of mystical experience. He found his mysticism in the scripture, in the word of God. That's where the mystic resided for him. Augustine does describe a few of his experiences. Julian has this one vision when she's dying and she sees Jesus, and she has a vision, a number of visions, and then she just simply reflects on those visions for the rest of her life. But she doesn't continually have visions, but she's reflecting on those original visions that she had as she was thinking that she was about to leave this earth, and she's given visions. So you'll find that some mystics will describe visions and others not at all. Like Brother Lawrence, he doesn't really describe any particular kind of dramatic fireworks kind of vision. So I think there are the mystics with a capital M, like a Teresa of Avila or John of the Cross, and then there are mystics with just a small m, which is most of us, I think. Any other thoughts on that question? Who is a mystic? Okay, in your reading of the four mystics that we've explored so far, whose writings have you most been drawn to, or do you find most intriguing of those four mystics? There'll be many more to come, but just of those four, who do you find yourself most drawn to, or just you would want to read more or learn more about them? Do you have a preference, or do you find all of them totally fascinating? Or not?
Actually, honestly, I still have been thinking that Julian is nuts. I just, I know Samantha's laughing at me. I find her bodily desires to identify with Christ bodily very unusual and extreme. But I think I really have connected most with the images of God from Augustine, and particularly the fountain of life. I think that's been a really, I've really resonated with that.
Okay, good. Yeah, I've been very impressed with your postings this week on comparing the two of them and their images, and some are very drawn to Julian and her very kind of bodily images, and others more drawn to Augustine, who is more of, I would call it, intellectual mystic, and a lot of his images come from more the intellect or, light, whereas Julian finds God is clothing to her. I mean, she even thinks of God as wrapping herself in clothing, and God is that clothing, which is an image that you don't necessarily hear that often. So definitely there are some differences in the way they see God or image God, and yet Julian very much built on Augustine. I mean, she was Augustinian in all her theology, because that would have been the prevalent theology of her time. So she's very Augustinian, and yet she has a little different emphasis than Augustine. Anyone else want to share a mystic they were particularly drawn to of these four? Or one that they were particularly not drawn to? You'd like to share that as well. No preference?
Yeah, I'm actually completely opposite of Rhonda, because I love Julian, and I find her imagery just so warm and embracing, and it really just resonates with some of my own experience, not the radicalness necessarily, but just getting into my body and having my body inform me of things and connecting me to God. So that it just really speaks to me. And Augustine, I just find him too heady, and I find that I need to get out of my head. So I don't know. I find it fascinating just listening to people this week, just how we're drawn. And I think it's actually just part of our uniqueness and how we were created. And I think it's kind of a cool thing to just see what we're drawn to.
Yeah, it really is interesting comparing these two, because I mean, even if you think about the Myers-Briggs, some of us are, head people, and some are heart people. And I think if we're head people, primarily we gain our information through our minds, and probably will be drawn to Augustine, because that's how he did. And yet he certainly was a heart person too. I mean, there's a lot of passion there as well. But Julian is definitely a heart person. That's just really obviously that she would be heart person on the Myers-Briggs. So our personality will kind of draw us one way or the other to some of these mystics. And some of the mystics are very intellectual, cognitive types. Eckhart would be another good example, as you'll read further on, and others, Francis of Assisi or Teresa, it's all about the passion of the heart. It's the way that they describe their experiences. So there's a mystic for every personality. And
it seems like Julian is a really high S in her senses. Her physical senses is a high S. And I would think Augustine is much more in the perception and perceiving of God. So I don't know if that's a heart-mind thing, but find it just interesting in that sense.
Yeah, I guess sensate versus intuitive, but I mean, they're both intuitive and they're both sensates in some way, but Julian definitely, senses just abound in her writings. For Augustine, he really is, he's going inward, and he is doing this self-analysis and more kind of psychological kind of reflection, which you don't find in Julian. So there's definitely differences, and the fact that he was highly educated for his time, where Julian, we don't really know anything about what form of education she may have had. She obviously had some, because she writes in a very kind of literary style, at least for that time. She is the first woman to write in English. I hope you notice that. It's an important fact. First woman to write in the English language. So, yeah, just as far as their particular context and the education resources that they had available will make a difference too in what they actually produce. But Rhonda, if you think Julian Strange now, you've got a lot more to go. We haven't gotten into her images of God as mother yet, so that will be interesting. So there's a lot more on the way. Okay, anything that has really surprised you so far in what you've read about the mystics?
I'm talking a lot today, sorry. I've been surprised at how I have connected with them. And even Julian and her clothing image, actually, because I have read other things of her, and I know that she's asked even for illness unto death and wounds and all those kinds of things that just seem radical. But I really did connect with her view of clothing. I've been able to connect with each one in different ways, and I wouldn't have thought myself a mystic or being able to connect in that way. So that's been really intriguing to me.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Yes, yes. And desiring a wound, that does seem very strange. That just does not speak to our sensibilities. But again, the time that she lived, there was such an emphasis on the wounds and the suffering that it's part of the context that she comes out of. And it wouldn't have been seen as unusual at all in that day. For us today, yes, that seems really extreme. But in those times, 14th century, those particular times, which was a horrible time of plague, and there was just suffering everywhere, that the idea that suffering is a part of spirituality and spiritual growth was just in the air. That's just what everyone thought. So definitely that particular context she came out of is why desiring a wound, which seems so extreme to us today, was part of spirituality then. Just as celibacy was part of spirituality in the early period. Origen, Augustine, they wanted celibacy was a path of spirituality. And again, we would see that as pretty extreme. Although the Catholic Church still thinks, if you're a priest or monk, celibacy is part of spirituality. So that's something that we'll see always throughout the Middle Ages, even this continuing thing that we need to kind of separate our sexuality, and sexuality is for God, and it's purified in that sense. And that's probably one of the downsides, I think, of some of the mystical teachings. So you're not going to agree with everything and find everything of value to you, but the wonderful option you have with the mystics is that you can choose to take the gold and leave the dross, you might say. So you don't have to agree with everything they say and teach, but there's much that we can learn from them. And it sounds like you all are kind of finding things that are very insightful and surprising that you are even relating to the mystics, as Rhonda says. Anyone else want to share something surprising, something that you didn't expect?
Yeah, there was that article that was in last week's thing. It was talking about the second person of the Trinity being our mother twice, once a creation, once a new birth. Struggle with the whole mother concept in the second person of the Trinity. That was tough.
Yeah,
But
that
cool for
probably
her.
is a very new idea, and that's definitely comes right out of Julian. You'll read a lot more about that as you read further in Julian. The idea that God can be mother or father, because the father image of God is just so thoroughly a part of Scripture. Now there are feminine images of God, definitely, but the most prominent, of course, in both Old and New Testaments is the father image. So, can we think of God as mother or see images of God in a motherly way? Well, Julian does. She even sees Jesus as mother because Jesus gives us birth. We are born again through Christ. So she sees that image of the mother as part of the way to think about God and even Jesus. So that might sound quite shocking to our ears today. And yet she's writing this in the 14th century, and it didn't seem to shock people then. So that's kind of interesting that we would find it more shocking now than she did. So the images of God as mother were actually more common in medieval times than they are today.
I have always heard the Holy Spirit as having the attributes, more the female attributes. So it is a little out of our aspects, I guess, to think of Christ as having those female attributes or motherly attributes. But when you read them in her context, I think it can make some sense. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with the terminology, but I think that there is some, when you think of the creation and the recreation, those are pretty well female attributes in our world that are not offered to the male counterpart.
Mm-hmm. Well, Julian says that God is our Father through God's power, and then God is our mother through wisdom. And what's interesting is that wisdom, both in the Old Testament, it's chokmah, it's a feminine word. And in Greek, it's Sophia, which is also a feminine word. So the idea of God as wisdom is perfectly biblical. In Proverbs, we see wisdom spoken a lot, and it's always feminine, her, she. Wisdom was with God in the beginning of creation. And what eventually happens is that the chokmah and Sophia, the female words for wisdom, become logos later, and then it becomes a male word, and so Christ is logos. But definitely we have both the feminine images for wisdom, and then logos as the word, which takes on more of a masculine. So God does not have gender, so God is actually feminine and masculine. I mean, we're in the image of God, male and female, so God must have both feminine and masculine attributes, or if we think about God at all as a person, but we all know that God is beyond person. So all these images are just analogies, just ways to think about God, because God in God's essence is beyond our cognitive abilities, beyond our mind. Metanoia, beyond the mind, transcends the mind. Okay. Let's see. We could talk a little bit about the emphasis on the Trinity as image of God. Both Julian and Augustine write about that a lot. They're both what I would call Trinitarian mystics. And yet, for most Christians, the Trinity seems like something that they're not even really, they don't talk about it, they're not necessarily even aware of it. In fact, eminent theologian Karl Rahner said that if the Trinity were to disappear, to quietly disappear out of Christian theology, most of Christendom would never even notice. And I wonder if you think that might be true. I mean, how practical is the image of the Trinity for most people? How meaningful is it to you? For some, it's just such a mystery and such a conundrum that they don't even think about it. And yet for the mystics, most of them are very Trinitarian, and they do focus a lot on the Trinity and the meaning of the Trinity. and images of the Trinity. Thoughts on that? How
I do.
is it? Okay.
So I have been intrigued with this idea of Trinity as, and I'm going to express this badly because it's kind of new thinking, but a Trinity as an example of relationship or a way of being in community. And so I'm looking forward to reading more about that. But that is shifting a little bit about the way I think about that. And I find that interesting. For sure, I think the world could use more and better ways of being in community. So.
I think that's one of the really deep insights of Julian and other mystics as well, is that the Trinity is about a community of persons. It's about relationship. It's about kinship. She uses the word kinship a lot. So the idea that the Trinity is kind of this community of love that flows into each other, each of the persons of the Trinity. And we can access that. We can be part of that community, I think is what she's saying. We can, we're invited to be a part of that community of love, of three persons in which love flows around, circular, through that community. So that's a little different way of thinking of the Trinity, instead of trying to think of, water, ice, and vapor, these other kind of non-relational type ways to think about the Trinity. But I think thinking of the Trinity as a community can be very helpful. Other thoughts about how the Trinity can enhance our image of God? Well, you can think more, reflect more on that. And some of you did in your posts. As I say, I've been very impressed. The depth of your posting, particularly this week, I think you really did a lot of deep reflection, and some of your posts were very, very thoughtful. So I appreciate that. It looks like we are just about out of time. I do want to ask if you have any questions about the project, the group projects that you're working on. Hopefully you've made some progress with those, and I want to let you know that there will be in the room technology available if you want to do PowerPoint or play music or anything like that. That's available in the classroom. You don't have to use technology, but it is there if you'd like to use it. So any questions or concerns about the project that you want to bring up at this time? Okay, well, sounds like things are going well. Then you've connected with your group members and you've been working on that. Any other just general questions or concerns about the course, about expectations, online postings? We're all on the same page? Any parting thoughts? Okay, well, I guess I will let you go. I'm sure you all have a busy day ahead, and we'll see you soon face-to-face. I will look forward to face-to-face. I much prefer face-to-face classes than online, but online, I think for the mystics, online works well, because I always say that the mystics teach themselves. You read them and you talk about them, and they will definitely provoke a lot of thought and a lot of reflection. Okay, well, I will say farewell, and next time I see you, we'll be in the classroom at the seminary. So have a good day.
Thank you.